Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Well, good evening to our guests. Good afternoon to our East Coast guests. I am Jamie Stozer, one half of the Dreamcatchers. So excited to be back here with one of my oldest and dearest friends who I reconnected with, although already connected because of, drumroll, Clubhouse, which I am finally embracing. I think I'm a little delayed. I'm not that delayed. I still have a lot of friends that
No.
have absolutely no idea how to use it. So, welcome to Katie. We're going to have Katie introduce herself in just a second. Just wanted to welcome everyone here. We are live on Clubhouse. We are live on Facebook. We are recording for our podcast. We are all over the place today and super excited about it. Just to kind of back up just a moment, I just joined Clubhouse. For those of you that don't know anything about it, it's awesome. If you're looking for an invite and you really want to get on it, it is something you need to be invited to. Please reach out. I have a few invites that I can maybe think about giving away. And essentially, what it is like I read an article today about it. Ming, I'm sure, would have some really interesting thoughts on this, but it's basically a podcast that never ends, which is exactly what Marissa and I, it's like our dream, right? To just talk all day, every day and have people listening to us. It's overwhelming and I can't figure it out. But what happened was I went to download it, and the first person I saw that I knew was Katie, and she's a good friend of mine. I'm like writing to her on Clubhouse. I'm like, what is this? How do I do this? And I just like heard her voice, like she was talking to her husband. And I was like, I'm like sitting on the couch, like, oh my God, I'm like eavesdropping on Katie's life. Like, what am I doing? I had no idea what was happening. So P.S. she writes to me she's texting me. She's like, try again. I'm like trying to get into her room. I have no idea what's happening. So we end up having a private room, which is not the point. And we fully talked on Clubhouse about getting back to on Clubhouse to talk again, because she told me that she had just finished a room about entrepreneurship with her colleagues at Salesforce. And I was like, that's my podcast theme. Like, let's chat. And so, PS to this, because of this, we, reconnected about professional things. And here we are today. And I'm so happy to have her. And so, if anybody's on Clubhouse and wants to just come check us out over there, feel free to to come on over to our room. I think it's pretty cool that we're in there as well. So, Marissa, do you have anything you wanted to add to that? And we'll have Katie introduce herself.
No. We're live from 6 different places except Manhattan. I'm in my favorite spot that everyone's starting to get used to seeing me. And then sometimes I just go a little bit like this and then a little bit like this. So live from the home office. But in the, as I keep calling it, all the different Hunger Games atmospheres, we're in all the different worlds. I am happy to see you, Katie. I haven't seen you in years.
I know.
They're treating you kindly. And I am inspired for our guests to kind of hear your story. I think one of the things that Jamie mentioned this, but what Jamie and I geek out about the most is learning about people's career journey, which really just goes to show you how incredibly exciting we are. And this is not even because of COVID.
I get really excited about it too.
Yeah, like this is who we were like prior. It's like how you get to where you're going. And it's funny, we joke like, is there anything off topic that we shouldn't say? When like the truth is we're not here to discuss Katie's big gig at Salesforce. We're here to discuss
how
Katie
she got there.
and how she got to Salesforce. So if you want to read about like top secret documents in the industry, you're in the wrong spot.
Yeah, this is not your
so
spot.
we're more on the human side. And I think after putting people to work for 16 years and trying to figure out open positions and how to put good people into those positions, we got exceptionally proficient at speaking to, engaging with, inspiring and professional hugging, so to speak, anybody that was on a journey working for traditional corporate. And I always believed that traditional corporate and employees were unsung heroes, that we don't talk about, how incredible a mentor could be or, your day-to-day grind. Instead, what's celebrated in social media and in press and in movies
and podcasts
are entrepreneurs, and actors and actresses and singers and songwriters and people that are doing things that are just about themselves usually. and not necessarily the rest of us soldiers in the world that are making magic in small ways at a time. This year, fortunately, I think nurses and teachers finally had a moment that they certainly deserve. And I'm not saying that for the rest of us, we deserve our Academy Award for whatever it is that we do, but the Dreamcatchers tries to use their voice and their platform to showcase and spread light about people like you, Katie, because I am certain that there are plenty of people on this earth that think of Katie Silvers fondly, and hopefully only fondly, about how she has come into contact with them in their professional career. Because at the end of the day, work is a predominant chunk of our life.
Yeah.
So, without much further ado, who are you? And what are you doing on 75 platforms?
I love it. And by the way, yes, and just to interject for just a moment, I think that one of the things to reiterate there is that, there might be industry awards, there might be, things industry specific, but it's so hard to find platforms to celebrate, as we call them, like the every woman. It doesn't have to be a woman, but like the every man, the person that's just out there doing something amazing and doing really, really well. And that's not getting celebrated to the rest of the world that might find that super inspiring as far as a career path. So without further ado, as Marissa said, Katie, go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are, where you are, because I think that's interesting to people, and what you do.
I'm Katie Silvers. I am a director at Salesforce working on design and incubation. I'm an internal facing team, so I'm supporting our sales team and our solution engineers specifically, so our technical sales team. I am in West Yorkshire in England. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the UK or just think London is everything, I'm about 3 hours by train north. It's really beautiful up here, lots of beautiful walks you can go on, lots of great scenery. It's very far from London. Everyone here talks like Jon Snow, so it's very hard to understand people. That is the accent. That is the Yorkshire accent. So
okay, are you going to come home with that, Katie?
Not yet.
You're going to lose your Long Island accent? Never.
I actually said that when I moved here, I was going to double down on Long Island because I'd kind of let that go. But I feel like I really need to, like, my coffee, like that needs to really be accentuated.
Needs to stick.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. I talked about this a little bit off air, but I'll say it on air. Katie and I were fortunate enough to meet in Israel on a trip that was my second time in Israel in 2 years, which I was so fortunate to be able to go twice. And we met, it was 2008, in the summer of 2008. And Dave and I both went on the trip, my husband and I, and just as a quick sidebar, we both went on this trip, and it was kind of like a trip that was like designed for you to meet a mate. It wasn't necessarily like publicized that way, but it was like, are you single? Like on the interview, it was like, are you single? Like, and we didn't think we'd get on the trip because we were in a relationship. And at first we were like, should we lie on the interview? Like, and we're like, we're not gonna lie. Like, there's like rabbis who are interviewing you. I'm like, I'm not gonna lie to the rabbi. I'm just gonna like tell him that I have a boyfriend, and meanwhile, they like to say still to this day that it was them that convinced him to propose when we got home, but that wasn't true. But long story long, we get to this trip and we were like everyone's favorite because like Dave wasn't like competition with the boys and I wasn't competition with the girls, and we were just like friends with everyone. But we literally made like one best friend, and that was Katie, and we called ourselves the Tricycle for the 10 days that we were there because she was like the best third wheel ever. She was literally Dave's favorite and also my favorite. So we just had this love affair in Israel, and you have an experience with someone, as I'm sure you guys can all relate, even if it's short, and you make like an impact on that person's life, like forever, like imprinted on me forever, even if I don't get to see or speak to her as much as I'd like. So Katie,
feeling is so mutual. I just need to interject. It is so mutual.
I love you. Okay. So our favorite first question, Katie, before I start crying about how much I love you, is literally our favorite question that we ask in every interview. And it's so indicative of kind of where you land. And I think it's so interesting because you've had such an interesting path and pivoted a few times, which we'll get to, is what is your earliest memory of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Because I'm guessing you likely wasn't living in like the UK countryside working for like a multi-billion dollar, organization. But I'd love to hear what your earliest memory of your, what you wanted to be. And then we always like to kind of correlate that to how you, where you landed.
So I wanted to be a few things all at once, a veterinarian, a ballet dancer, and first woman president. And all of those things were like, I'm going to just do all of them at the same time. And I was pretty certain that that was going to happen.
Okay, so ballet dancer, a doctor, a pet doctor, and a leader. And what's so
the first female president, let's be fair.
But I'm like just dumbing it down for like a moment to kind of show you that, you like to help. Obviously, at a young age, you were creative, you like to help people, and you wanted to be a leader. So do you do those three things now, Katie? Are you a leader? Do you help people? Or are you creative?
So it's actually really funny that I could probably do more of the helping people, but the creative side, which I never thought I was, and the leadership side are both things that I do. And I never would have correlated those three things with what I do now, but I love that you've found a way to do that. Well done.
There you go. Welcome to the Dreamcatchers, Katie. So that's always our favorite first question, because I think often we'll talk to people in their careers at every stage. And one of our favorite questions is like really digging, and not to say we're not life coaches, we're not, licensed life coaches, we're not psychiatrists, but what we end up doing with people is really kind of challenging them to think about when they're struggling, especially because if you can imagine, a lot of people come to us when they're not happy. So really is, what did you want to be? Like, and who are you in your group of friends? Like, who are you? What are your skills? So that's really where that question comes into play. So tell us then, obviously those three things were your first earliest memory. As you started in school, and give us a little rundown of your path and how you landed at school and what you started to study and a little bit of your internships, those first formative years. But actually first, what was your first real job? Did you work in any of those areas as a job?
Well, real job meaning as an adult or paying job as a kid?
A paying job as a kid. What was your first paying gig?
My first paying gig is hysterical. I was a carny. I worked at a carnival.
Oh my God, stop. I love that.
So a good friend of mine in middle school, her dad and his brother were part owners in a carnival business that kind of traveled around Long Island and did all the big festivals in the summer. And I and all of my friends my age, so there was like a ton of us, like 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, like right when you get working papers, right? And we all would get picked up right after school and we'd go and help set up these carnivals. And then we'd come home really late at night, like 10, 11 o'clock as like a 14-year-old. And we would run the games. So we'd be on the microphone, we'd be calling people over, we'd be playing I was so good at those like wire and basketball games and all of that as a kid, because that's what I did for summers all throughout like my young adulthood. It was super fun.
Oh my God. I love that. That's a really fun fact, actually.
We've done a lot of interviews. No one has ever said that.
Yeah, people are like, I worked as a babysitter. Although I will say last week we had a really awesome interview with a guy named Rob Smith from the Fluid Project. Highly recommend you check him out. He told us that he cleaned up after the Rocky Horror Picture Show, like at his like local.
That was his first job.
A cool thing if you think about it, like as a young man, like interested in the arts and creative and like being able to do that and like meet the actors and actresses after and like clean it up and all that is super cool. I love that answer.
The carnival vibe, like the cleaning up, like that, like the working at the arcade gives me like a really strong Karate Kid reference.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, listen, this just goes to show you like my pop culture, like what we watch in our house, but we definitely have gone through a few of those seasons. Did that make its way to you
I haven't watched the Cobra Kai, is what we're talking about. I haven't watched it yet, but it is, I mean, we do get Netflix, so it is here.
So, you do get Netflix there. I would say, LOL. I would say that Cobra Kai would bring you back some nostalgia.
It's on the list, so we might have to bump it up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Stranger Things too, but like, you know,
Everything's on the list.
there's a little more reference to the carnival element. Okay, so we worked in a carnival, and you led the games, which, by the way, is not easy if you really think about it. You're engaging an audience.
By the way, fun fact, we are known in this area, which is, by the way, not to say we didn't have a lot of carnivals growing up in North Jersey, but like where we are, the concept of like the fireman's fair, which is like a really big deal down here. Like every fire department, that's how they raise their money, because all of our fire departments are volunteer. It's like a really big deal here. And the Fairhaven Fireman's Fair is like, I'll never forget when we first moved here. I moved here August 16th of 2016 or whatever it was, like that week. And I remember everyone's like, oh my God, you're just in time for the fair. And I'm like, what, where am I? And what year am I in? And it was like, you have no idea what you're in for. And we can walk there and this whole thing. And it's like, you go every night and your kids have a million tickets. And it's a huge part of our culture, which thankfully, hopefully will be back this year. It got canceled last year for the first time, like ever in Fairhaven's history. But I really, it really resonates what you're talking about, like working these games, because so many of the high school kids here, that's what they do in the summer is they work the games. And Sam, my oldest, is so excited to be like one day being able to like work the game. So like, this is like a conversation in our house. I'm like, you could do that. That's like a real job in this town. Okay. So you first were a carny, then you went off to school upstate, and tell us a little bit about then your journey as to how you got, you know, closer to law, and like when you started to study and what your internships were, and, you know, how you started to really figure out what you wanted to do.
Yeah. So I mean, while I was in high school, I had won a debating competition as part of a team. And so that got me thinking about law and studying law. Of course, my parents were kind of pushing me in that direction. And University of Albany in New York had a really good political science program because it's in the capital of the state. Mm-hmm. So I figured, okay, I'm going to go. I like politics. I like history. I'm going to study poli-sci. And then I'm going to go to law school. And that was like, I was pretty clear on that path. Like, that's what I was going to do. I got into the honors program. I worked my butt off, got into law school and went. So while I was there, I interned at a lawyer on Long Island in the summer. I had a retail job at a jewelry store. So I continued to do that to get paid. But I actually called every lawyer in the phone book until somebody said they would hire me. So back in the day when we had phone books,
I remember that's real hustle.
I hustled because I was like, well, if I'm going to do this thing, like I need to like work and figure out if this is like a thing that I want to do. And so I found, you know, kind of a mom and pop law firm, actually right down the street from the jewelry store that I worked at. And I would go in a couple of days a week. I don't even think they were paying me, but I was just kind of learning and figuring it out. And I was like, okay, I can do this. If they can do it, I can do this. And so I just kind of went for it.
I love that. And by the way, I just want to highlight something there because so many of our listeners are, you know, at that age, like graduating and deciding what they want to be. And I think that's such an interesting point is that you get this unpaid internship and you still continue to work in a jewelry store so that you get money, but that you could, you know, so you were hustling. I mean, you were working 2 jobs and you were young, and that's important to note. And that's, you know, a lot of times people ask us like, do I put that both on my resume? Like, how do I indicate that? And I think that that's something really impressive. And I'm sure at the beginning there, it was important for you to show that you were doing those things because that showed that you were, you know, really trying to hustle, but at the same time make money, which is totally fine. Okay, so then you did that. Did you go to law school right after school?
I just went straight. So it was 2002 when I graduated college. And so we had like a kind of mini recession at that point. It wasn't like 2008 by any means, but it was like a little dip in the market. And so I was like, you know what, I could either look for a job or I can just go right to school and hope that the market kind of picks up. And that's what I did. I just went straight, and we had students of all age at the law school, but my closest friends, many of them kind of did the same thing.
Love it. And then, so then talk to us a little bit about how then you went from, you know, not to skip over your law years, but let's talk about how you became a lawyer and then how quickly you decided what you wanted to do instead. Because I remember having this conversation when we first met, because I found it so fascinating even then that there was like jobs out there, which I find your particular, world so interesting, where you could have made that pivot to, instead of practicing law, but training lawyers in a product that they were using. So I'd love to hear how you then went off to law, but then how you pivoted to what where you started doing a little bit more product work.
Yeah, so I was working at a law firm. It was my second law firm after law school, which in 2 years, because although the people at the first law firm I worked at were lovely, I didn't love it. And I thought maybe it was the firm, right? So I said, I like these people. I want to stay friends with them, but I need to like move on and find something that I love. When I was in law school, I had worked at the federal government, and it was a great job and I loved it. In their law department, it was the General Services Administration, but there was a hiring freeze when I graduated law school. And so they couldn't hire me. And so we kept in touch, and they kept saying, when the hiring freeze opens up, we're going to hire you. You're our next hire. Great. I moved to another law firm, thought, okay, I'm going to love this law firm. It was definitely the work I was doing. I didn't love it anymore. It took me about 10 months to figure out that in your newsletter, you write about the Sunday scaries, right? I had the Sunday scaries, and I was young. I was 26 years old or 27 years old. And I felt sick on Sunday nights, and it wasn't anything that anyone at the firm was doing. It was just, I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to do that.
I had them too. I had those too when I was 24, 25 years old. Hence why I don't do what I was doing at that time anymore.
Exactly.
It took me a while to get there, though. Yeah.
And it was really hard, right? My parents didn't understand. I had passed the New York bar and the New Jersey bar actually on the first try. And so they were like just so proud of that I had studied and passed it. And they were so worried I wouldn't. And how could you take this big test and commit all these years to school and then walk away from it? But I had run into a friend of a friend, who is now my friend, but at the time, a friend of a friend, at a birthday party. And I knew she was a lawyer. She was a friend of mine from college's law school friend. She went to a different law school. And I said, you're always so happy. Why are you so happy? Like, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing. She's like, oh, I don't actually practice law anymore. I work for LexisNexis. And I was like, oh, we use LexisNexis, which is, for those of your listeners who don't know, it's a software, an online software that lawyers use to research cases and statutes. And
I used it a lot in PR too. We used to do a lot of research on LexisNexis. Yeah.
It's also been around a long time, because I remember, this is going to really there's nothing good about what I'm about to say, but in like the microfiche era, which is when I would be digging in the stacks, like writing papers with my fingers and pens. I remember we used LexisNexis as like a research platform.
Yeah, that's it. It was a cubicle that you could its own kind of freestanding computer that you could do research on. It's books, it was publishing, it was kind of all kinds of things for 100 years. It's been around a long time. Like pieces of the business have been around a really long time. And she was like, we're actually hiring. You'd be great. You've got the personality for it. You should interview. And so I put in my resume. Actually, at the same time, the federal government got back to me and said, we've got a job for you. And LexisNexis offered me the job, and I had to choose between the two of them. And I chose LexisNexis, and it was a really, really hard, it's funny because I haven't even thought about that in such a long time, but it was a really hard decision. But I wanted to jump, and I wanted to try something new. And I felt like I could bring something to that company that I couldn't necessarily bring to the federal government.
I love that.
I think your story, so you have to, traditionally we interview people that are professionally, not necessarily on our podcast, but in our regular lives, we are dealing or engaging with people that are in fashion or media careers most of the time. So, a story such as yours mimics that, but it would be like, you thought you wanted design, but you happen to be very proficient in math. And next thing you know, you were a merchant or doing buying, and you weren't a designer. So for you to be kind of bulldozing ahead and wanting to only be in law, and like to be presented with a position where you are going to be working in the federal government, and at the same time, you're juxtaposed with an opportunity doing something completely different. I just need to call upon that. That's what we call like a professional God universe moment, right? Where you have your first choose your own adventure chapter, where who knows what Katie would have been like if she opted to go the traditional judicial lawyer route and gone work for the federal government. But instead, you honored your heart younger than you knew you were doing that by channeling your carnival slash jewelry retail self and marrying it to the two, and put yourself into the skills that you studied for, but used your soft skills. So I think what happens in your 20s, which we can only talk about now because we're grown-ups, is you're so focused on one set of skills that you don't necessarily incorporate all of your other skills into your job decision process. And there's a lot of talk about soft skills now, but I think I wanted to interject there and highlight that you literally chose between your hard and soft skills.
Yeah.
And you happen to be fortunate enough to have an offer in both, which is very rare, but you literally chose between one versus the other. And I think it's really interesting because you do find that professionally people feel more reward when they are using, this is not a fact, this is just based from, I'm not pulling this from anywhere, it's just based from 16 years of doing it. When you are using your soft skills more often, you feel much more professionally rewarded.
I think that's absolutely true.
I love that. By the way, this is a really good spot to cut. Ming, we're going to cut our Facebook feed. For those of you that are interested to hear how Katie then went from being a carny to being a senior level player at Salesforce and living in the UK, check us out on Apple Podcast, and we'll see you over there. But we're also on Clubhouse still, so check us out there if you'd like.